Greetings once again, and welcome to the Silence of Our Friends. That's right, this is our weekly offering that has to do with our social take on issues of both black and brown people, people of color in these yet to be United States. I'm so glad you are streaming with us, and I welcome our YouTube audience, of course. I'm asking you to share the link. I believe you are going to be very interested in everything we have to discuss on our program tonight. And I think it will be of some edification and benefit to people of color and people not of color. That's the thing about this particular show, is it is not privy to or biased, partial to any racial group. I believe that what I'm called to do and what I'm assigned to do has everything to do with the betterment and uplift of people of all ethnicities and all racial groups. So share the YouTube link. And if you're watching us tonight by way of Facebook, please follow, like, and share. Comment, follow, like, share. That should be the succession. Comment, like, share, follow. And the same holds true on our YouTube channel and channels. Please help us to grow and gain more presence on YouTube by sharing this particular link. And when you go back and archive the Silence of Our Friends, of course, you can watch all of our previous shows. And at that time, it would be desirable from me to you that you will share our link with your friends and people that you know will benefit from our offerings. Tonight is very important to me. Each Monday night is important to me because of the content that I desire to share with you, and I believe will be beneficial to our position here in these turbulent, disturbed, intentionally, I believe, disturbed, yet to be United States. We are here. This is called, or has been referred to historically as the Great Melting Pot, which means that people have come from all over the globe, all over the continent and out of the continent to be a part of the Americas. There is one exception to that. They're called immigrants, and someone made the mistake of referring to people of color and their existence in this country as immigration. Well, no, immigration and kidnapping are two different adjectives if you look at it that way, verbs if you look at it from the action that was taken. So yeah, people of color in America and these yet to be United States were the only group that I know of that were kidnapped from one continent, the continent of Africa, brought under duress and under very stressed and strained conditions to this country, never considered as equal humans with those of their white or non-African counterparts. That is the difference between being an immigrant and being kidnapped outside of your own volition, against your volition, and brought here, then made to work as slaves. Not even as indentured slaves, because indentured slavery has something to do with some compensation being given for your understood enslavement. None of those rules apply to people of colors. And so it's America's great sin, but the reciprocal of that sin is the story that has been spun or spinned about it relative to his story. Yes, not our story, his story. And so tonight is going to be very interesting. I welcome your participation. As far as the comments are concerned, I'd love to hear from you. Dr. King said to us, in the end, what will be remembered will not be the silence, or rather the comments or words of our enemies, but the silence of our friends. And that's really a paradoxical in thought for me, to have a friend who would see his reciprocal friend in trouble and yet maintain some degree of silence. I want to explore tonight, and I'll tell you the show's topic in 1 minute's time. I want to explore tonight reasons that people who were involved generationally, then not involved, were made to be silent. And that silence is still effective today. There are people Again, Dr. King makes the statement that nothing in the world is more dangerous as sincere ignorance or conscientious stupidity. And you have both veins that have interplay as far as races and ethnic groups dwelling here in America are concerned. You have both the school of stupidity that comes as a result of sincere ignorance, and then conscientious stupidity. Sincere ignorance, to me, as we explore that thought, has everything to do with people who are sincere on the one hand, but while they are sincere, they're yet ignorant. They are not knowledgeable of the facts. They are not abreast of the facts. They're not abreast of the goings on. They have no real concept of truth. They have situational truth. They have subjective truth, but they have no idea of the truth about a matter and matters within itself. Objective truth, the naked truth, as some of our colloquialisms might express. Then there's the other side we refer to by way of Dr. King's statement, those who are conscientiously stupid. Sincere ignorance, conscientious stupidity. Those are the persons who have the facts presented to them. They are educated, they're trained, yet their stupidity outweighs the legitimacy of facts. They want to be where they are because of the influences that they have been under all of their lives. And so a program like this becomes necessary because you are dealing with something that is layered, tiered historically, with by way of lesser minds who have controlled the narratives, the narrative of history, the truths of history, and how they have been offered to people who would be their successors and receivers of those particular truths. And so tonight, my father said something to me a long time ago, and I was probably about 9 or 10 years of age. My father he's in heaven with Jesus now, but he was one of the wisest men, astute men that I've ever met. And I don't say that simply because he was my father, but people who knew him would agree with me. He was not a man of a lot of words necessarily. He was fun-loving. However, he spoke words of truth, and his words were very impactful. He intentionally reserved his words to make the most out of them. And so one day, here I am about in the 4th grade. So I was either 9 or 10 years of age, 4th or 5th grade. And he made a statement to me, as he often would. And he said, son, the old adage is, if you wear rose-tinted glasses, the entire world is rose-tinted to you. I'm 9 or 10 years of age. And because that was his custom, by making certain statements, he was a purveyor of truth, and he knew it would move us being his children. I have 4 siblings. And he knew it would move us to research the matter. And so sometimes when we were very young, we would ask him, and as we became older, he would say, go study it and find out. I've made these sacrifices with your mother for these 3 sets of encyclopedias, 2 Britannica sets, and 1 world encyclopedia set. And they were very expensive back in the day. And so they forced us to use them and to become, as my mother's words were, critical thinkers by way of critical analysis. That means you look at both right and wrong, up and down. You look at the longitude and the latitude, and discover the truth for yourself. She would often say, if you're going to be intelligent, you have to be aware of both sides of any issue and then research for the truth. And so I'm glad for that background. I appreciate that upbringing. And so when my father said this to me, he said, whoever wears rose-tinted glasses, the world looks that color to them. He said, if you change the lenses of the glasses, your world will appear that way to you. Now, what I came to understand about that is that the world is not rose tinted. The world is not dark hued or orange tinted, jaded by the color of the lens that one is looking through. And I came to learn, secondly, that while the world was not the color of the lenses, secondly, I learned that it was a fact. Whatever lens you're viewing a matter through determines the way that matter looks to you, whether it is true or not. What is the old adage? Truth is real to the perceiver. It doesn't make it so. It doesn't make it exact, but to the perceiver, to the one who thinks it. And then the third thing I learned from his statement was that it had nothing really to do with eyesight as much as insight. He was trying to communicate to me that the way you see things was not as much as weighed heavily with the eyes as much as it was with the mind. So tonight's show is entitled Rose Tinted Glasses, ellipsis, ... Rose tinted glasses. Here at the Silence of Our Friends, our objective is to discover truth, present the truth, with the hopes of changing the minds of both those who have been the liars, or those who have not told the truth correctly, as well as to recover those who have been damaged by mishandled truths, otherwise called lies. So allow me to start off rather slowly. Rose tinted glasses. Some people want me, and I hear this all the time, and this has always been the truth, but as I get it more into the Silence of Our Friends and our tentacles as a ministry and as a minister, to reach into it without Bible thumping necessarily. That will come out because that's who I am. But my instructions from the Lord, whom I believe to be the creator, are to and were to touch people with truth, historical facts, for the unchurched, people who are not necessarily connected to church, but they're connected to hearing the truth. I was amazed in visiting the African American history aspect of the Smithsonian Institute there in Washington, D.C. Our church took nearly 200 people a couple of years ago when the museum first opened. And I was so amazed. In every museum I've traveled, museums that record the history or the plight of the African yet to be united in the states of the Americas. I've been amazed to see how many non-black people were at these museums of various places, as well as the Smithsonian Institute of African American Culture, or African American History. I was amazed to see people weeping that were not people of color at the displays, and we stayed all day, and it really could take 2 days, if not 3, to visit it. And the nearly 200 people we took were moved. I learned, however, in my travels that not everybody is interested in being given the truth, being given history that is not truthful. There are people who are in search of the truth because they understand the impact of the narrative. Whoever controls the narrative controls the ongoingness of life, if you will. Whoever controls the history controls the way people think in the future. This is the reason that after the Confederate War, the war between the states, the war that was fought between the North and the South over the issue of slavery, it was an economic war here in these United States, the only battleground of the United States in a war in our own country was the war between the states, the Civil War. I think I'm correct there. And then after the South lost, thank God the South lost, the Confederate lost. Regardless of the myriad of flags you see, they were losers. Thank God. But then immediately thereafter, and particularly it spiked during the Civil Rights Movement, where Confederate statues, Confederate names of generals were used in the South on public property, where all of our tax dollars have gone to support. And that was intentionally to jade, to sway the realities of truth, to influence the mindsets of those who would come after, that the truth about slavery, enslavement, the Confederate, the mindset that black people were never equal to their white counterparts here in America, to persuade people that those things were true. Remember, if you put on rose-tinted glasses, or if you have them forced on you, the world looks that way, because those are the lenses through which you view everything. Now, lest I be too long tonight, allow me to delve into our presentation. It's been so amazing to me that as a pastor, and then as a man of color, which I never and never will run away from or duck my head to or feel inferior. I wasn't trained that way, and I know who I am in Christ Jesus, which is a dual advantage for me. But it's been amazing on my journey in life how many people want me or feel that it's right for a churchman, churched person, to be quiet on these issues of race. It's amazing to me. Now, the right can say anything they want. They can get white evangelical pastors to back up fallacies of an administration that is corrupt. They can sell their souls to the devil and preach loud and strong in their pulpits, but they can't preach against truth, right and wrong, and corrective truth. But here, a person of color is expected to go back to their place as a church person of silence. And it's amazing to me that in your body, your physical body, you cannot ignore pain. Pain is an indication that something in the physical anatomy is not functioning properly. It's an ever-present reminder that something else outside the body needs to be sought for healing, sought for correction. If you ignore the pain in your body, I'm giving you an analogy here, doesn't make it, number one, go away or cause healing. Secondly, it can worsen the condition until the condition is treated. As it is with any allegory, truth is layered. If that is true, as far as the physical anatomy is concerned, it is also true as far as difficult and sensitive issues affecting the body of people in the world, if they are ignored or categorized as just forget it, or thirdly categorized as just walk in love, pray about it. No, you couldn't do that for your physical body, nor can you do it for the bevy or body of people who are in the world. And then here's another vantage point. Apparently, Jesus didn't think or wasn't taught to simply be silent, because in St. Luke chapter 13, 31, verses 31 and 32, when the Pharisees told him that Herod was going to kill him, Jesus spoke truth to power. He didn't say, well, I'm just going to pray for him, or I'm just going to be silent, or I hope this will go away, or golly gee, I'm so terrified. No, Jesus said, and I quote, go and tell that fox. Go and tell that fox. Speaking of a Roman emperor, a Roman governor at least, go tell him, I do work in the day, and at night I'll rest. In other words, he says, translation, I'm not afraid of him, and I'm not afraid, and also it is necessary to speak truth to power. Apparently, God must have known something was wrong when race issues occurred in the Bible. In Numbers chapter 12, Miriam, Moses' sister, blood sister, Aaron, Israel's high priest, first high priest, as well as Moses' elder brother, Moses being the youngest, Moses marries an Egyptian woman, and they begin to talk about, and Egypt is a city in Africa, so she is of a darker persuasion, and the reason they talked about it was because they had a problem being Jewish with him stepping outside of his race and marrying someone and being a leader, a premier leader of Israel and a son of Abraham. And so they discussed this issue, and God, the Father God who is love, corrected Miriam first with leprosy until she changed her views. There are people who have leprosy mindsets. The objective of our show is to at least give them different vantage points of consideration so that they can be healed from their leprosy mindsets and change to being cured or healed, as was the case with Miriam. And after Aaron saw it, he corrected himself. Apparently, the Apostle Paul, who wrote 2/3 of the New Testament, wasn't told to go in his church corner, walk in love, pray about matters. He confronted Peter, who was an apostle before himself, the Apostle Paul. In Galatians chapter 2, the scripture says, and it was over race. He ate with the Gentiles, non-Jewish people, anyone who is non-Hebrew, non-Jewish, natively born of the direct lineage of Abraham was called or classified, codified as a Gentile. And Peter's having a good time because Gentiles are more fun, but we'll get into that in another show. And until his Jewish brethren shows up, and then he puts away his Gentile associations. And the Apostle Paul has watched this, and he said, I confronted Peter to his face, and some translations said it turned into a brawl, a fisticuff, because he says he was to be blamed. There are people that are to be blamed, and it becomes the church's responsibility, as well as any other right-thinking person, to deal with it, not in silence, hoping the pain will go away, because as we've seen for ages or generations, it doesn't go away by itself. It must be treated. Here's a glossary. I like to give a glossary each week of terms and terminology, but tonight at least be words. Just simply 3 words, maybe 4. The first word is the word racism. What do we mean when we use the word racism or its derivative racist? Racism is defined as the following: hatred of hatred of other races besides one's own. In other words, you can be a white racist, you can be a black racist, and there are prevailing truths on both sides of the coin. I don't want to be anybody's racist. I don't believe in racial superiority, nor do I believe in racial inferiority. Either case is just as dangerous. Now, an extended definition of the word racism or racist is a belief or doctrine that, check this out, inherent differences among the various human racial groups determine cultural or individual achievement. Now, that's a mouthful. There are people who have racist viewpoints, and their racism lodges forth from the ideology, and I hope I can get into it if there's enough time tonight. The science that was taught that there are inferior races because of inherent differences, psychological, cerebral differences, inherent lesser differences than the white majority. In other words, there are black people and brown people and people of other persuasions who are necessarily born with a lesser ability to learn, to read, to calculate, to consider, to make valued judgments and assessments. There are people who believe that because of skin color, even though all blood is transferable, regardless of the race, all other things being equal, uh, other things such as blood type, but all other things being equal, regardless of your race, blood is transferable. But there are people who have been taught and consequently believe that there are inherent differences that make one race superior and another race inferior. I'll let you be the judge of who those two extremes represent. So again, a belief or doctrine that inherent differences among the various human racial groups determine cultural or individual achievement. That's why I have to tell you about the over 100 inventions and creations of people of color that have changed the scope of the Americas, regardless of the fact that we've never been accepted as equal opposites as humans of our white counterparts here in this country. And you'll have to watch our previous shows to pick up on that. Usually involving the idea that one's own race is superior and has the right to dominate others, or that a particular racial group is inferior to the others. So that's why we have to broach certain truths and correct the narrative. Secondly, the glossary word I'd like to present to you tonight is bigotry. Bigotry, Bigotry, or bigot, Bigot, the person. Bigotry has to do with stubborn and complete intolerance of any creed, belief, or opinion that differs from one's own. That is amazing. There are people who literally, because of skin color, if you tell the truth or give a correct representation of a particular narrative in history, because of whose mouth it proceeded, from whence it proceedeth, they believe it can't be true by way of skin tonation and differences. Amazing. The third word is the word discrimination. All of these, I believe, are synonyms of each other. Discrimination, treatment or consideration of, or making a distinction in favor of or against a person or thing based on the group, class, or category to which that person or thing belongs, rather than individual merit. Amazing. So the opposite of assessing people based on their individuality, their individual merit, is looking at them through rose-tinted glasses. These rose-tinted glasses would be discrimination, that based on the color of your skin, you have certain treatment and you belong in certain classes or a caste, C-A-S-T-E, caste system. Fourthly, the word bias, B-I-A-S, or biases in its plurality. This means unreasonably hostile feelings. You see, there's the difference between ADD and ADHD. One carries hostility. ADD is just a deficit disorder, attention deficit disorder. But attention deficit disorder that carry HD, attention deficit disorder with hostility, is ADHD, which means that that same student or individual can become violent to represent their ideas or idioms. In this case, bias, it has to do with an unreasonable hostility or feelings or opinions about a social group, prejudice, so forth and so on. Now, let me just give you one other word, which is an antonym for these four words that literally mostly mean the same, just have different hues of meaning. Fairness. This program seeks to promote fairness. The Bible is a book of fairness. God is a God. The God of the Bible is a God of fairness. And anytime, and I don't care who you tell about this, anytime there is inequity or unfairness based on race, ethnicity, customs, gender, or so forth and so on, you do not have a church. It doesn't matter who it is. It matters not about the name or how big the impression is among people, among the culture. Fairness is the opposite of these four words: bias, discrimination, bigotry, and racism. Without fairness, if you don't have fairness at the table, you're either dealing with a bigot, discriminatory practices, racist practices, or you're dealing with some biases in a big time way. Now, fairness has as its definition the state, condition, or quality of simply being fair or free from biases, racism, injustice. It simply means, in one word, even handedness. God, what would happen in this world if the races are dealt with or deal with each other or are dealt with even handedness? You know, Lady Justice, as she's referred to, it's supposed to be blind because the law should not be reflective of any of these prejudices or biases. And this is why Lady Justice, with the two scales in her hand, one is tipped the other way, referring to the weight of the law, is supposed to be blind. But she's been lifting up this blindfold to see what color people are in the judicial system for as long as we've been in the Americas. We've never, as a people, been treated fairly as far as nonviolent crimes are concerned, or any crime at all. Even being stopped in the customary stop by the police departments across our country, once they see the color you are, I mean, there's just no fairness. And we will have not reached a place of silence until there's fairness. If you want me to be silent, I will not rest until there are levels of fairness across this country. So what is slavery? I think what is slavery? When we talk about slavery and the vestiges, the invisible leftovers from slavery, I think that one term, a slave or slavery, is sort of a wholesale term, but it's been whitewashed. People who don't delve into slavery, they hear it, they have some association with it, but they've never been able to appreciate it for the heinousness and cruelty that it truly represents here in America by white people. Now, I know white people today will say, well, we didn't do it, but you benefited from it. So whether you did it or not, you benefited from it. And then black people were mitigated by it generationally. We're still playing catch up for a country we built as people of color, not immigrants, kidnapped to build a country and were liberated with no restitution. No restitution, no skills to speak of as far as literacy is concerned, no places to live, and consequently, we re-indentured ourselves, for lack of a better word, to the same slave master from whom we were liberated for sharecropping purposes, because we had to eat. We had to live somewhere, and those who didn't were picked up in slave prison encampments and still made to work, and hundreds of thousands of black men were lost that way in this country. No record of their existence. Let's go on. So slavery included many heinous things in the 17th and 18th centuries here in the Americas. Forced labor in the transatlantic slave trade, that is the kidnapping of slaves. There was no consent there. The kidnapping of slaves from Africa brought across the Atlantic Ocean to the east coast of America, the Virginias, South Carolina, or the pivotal points, so forth and so on, and then migrated to the south to work the tobacco crop as well as the cotton crop. And the plantation owners made mucho dinero, much money, by way of this free slave labor. These persons were made in the slave ship. I mean, as much as 15 to 20% of the stock, as they're referred to, were lost overboard because of incendiary diseases. When they had waste after eating whatever ration food they were given, they weren't taken to a restroom. They had to defecate or urinate right there in stocks. And, this took several months, 2 to 3 months, to come from Africa to the east coast of America. And that disease with the waste there, I was reading a report from one former slave. He said just the smell, the stench of it would kill you if the conditions didn't. And there were slaves who freed themselves and jumped over the bow of the ship to just not be enslaved. And so you lost 15 to 20%. Many people contracted diseases. That was before they even came to work a country that had no and has no appreciation for their efforts. Slavery, thirst, dehydration, whipping and rape, shackling, taking prisoners and binding them together with handcuffs by way of their feet or their hands or their necks, being put in stocks like oxen. That was legal. Hanging. We talk about lynching, and I'll have to tell you where that name derived from a person by the name of Willie Lynch, and that's an entire show. I need to dedicate that 1 hour to that process. But let's keep on going. Slavery had to do with sometimes metal collars being put on the slave to remind him of his or her wrongdoing. The collars were thick and heavy that often had protruding spikes, which made field work. They had to work from can't to can't see to can't see with these collars on, made field work difficult, which prevented the slave from sleeping when lying down. They were sold as families were ripped apart, never seeing each other again in this life. Infants were taken from their mothers, the fathers were used as breeders from plantation to plantation, so forth and so on. So let's go from there. I talked last week even about the pregnant women. If they disobeyed their slave masters, a hole was dug and they laid their pregnant stomachs in the hole, and their masters whipped them from that point, and they were sometimes even forced to sleep in that dire position. Slavery was heinous, and its vestiges, which I wish to get into now, the vestiges of slavery. I'm going somewhere. Please stay with me. Please stay with me. When I use the word vestige, I'm talking about ideas, leftover traces of the effects of a particular act. So there are intangibles that are residual, that are left over as a result of any kind of awkward or heinous treatment. So I'm using the word vestiges in that context. So the vestiges of slavery were huge, whitewashed, quote unquote, sanitized versions of true history. One of the reasons that people believe the way they believe today is because whites kept the history and they made it sanitized. They made it palatable. They made themselves look better than they were because they understood the importance of history and its impact on their successor generations. They also understood the devastating effects for a history that was passed on to people in a negative, or cast people in a negative light. They understood that these particular negative values would grow up in people and prevent them cerebrally from being able to be their best. I'll get more into that, so stay with me. Wherever history is whitewashed or sanitized or made to portray one racial group looking better than the other because of inherent perceived differences, several things come as a result of that. The one large piece to this, and this is the reason for the apex of this show, and this is my own philosophy. Please hear it. Where this exists, that means sanitation, whitewashing history, causing people of color to appear in a pejorative, demoralized way, or with deficits which you claim to be inherent, and making their white counterparts look superior to them historically, that is for generations, there are several effects. With this existence, there can be no change of mindsets because once it's in the book and the book is passed on, that carries those mindsets, even though the treatment might have changed a bit. The textbook, the history lessons continue. There can be no change of mindsets, direction, or thought because in the end, here it is, wait for it, the heinous treatment never existed. And this is the reason that no one in the white populace, for the most part, and if it's true, it's of skewed numbers, very misrepresented numbers, believes that people of color should receive reparations. I'm just talking about not even in the church. I'm talking about just naturally being brought to a position of being made whole for the contributions our ancestors have made. Because once you whitewash history and clear it up, it never existed. So it provides certain vantage points. The church can't preach about it because it wasn't that bad. Look at the history books, which we controlled. You know, I read something somewhere, and it's true. History was recorded by the winners. The people on the losing end never recorded even their own history of their losses. The slave didn't record history. The recorders of history were people who were educated, well off as far as rich people are concerned, people who won certain wars and were in privileged situations. I know there are people that hate that word, but it's real. In a recent article passed on to me entitled Archives Department Acknowledges Role in Distorting Alabama's History. You got to stay tuned for this. Now, Alabama, this particular department was at least brave enough to admit the whitewashing and the sanitization, the sanitizing basically of history. But this happened all over the country. And the reasons for that was if you change history to reflect yourself in a better light, you can ask the question for generations to come, why are you so angry? Why do we owe you anything? You all really didn't make any contributions. But just listen, let the article speak. Now, this is in Alabama. If Alabama can make this allegation, just think of what the other states would have done. This was dated June 23rd, 2020. It is the reporter was Mike Kaysen. The case was made that in several instances, Alabama, like many other keepers of history, remember history was recorded by the winners, rich, privileged, and educated, wink, wink, those are my comments, that truth in history was subject to the tellers, yellers, or spinners of it. That's my commentary again. Truth as we know it is always subject or subjugated to the keepers, tellers, yellers, and spinners of it. Now, the Alabama Department of Archives and History, listen up, said in a statement today, back in June 2020, that much of the 20th century it promoted a view of history that favored the Confederacy. Those were the Southerners who fought to keep slaves as slaves. And these are the keepers of history, the state keepers of history that favored the Confederacy and failed to listen and failed to document the lives and contributions of Black Americans. We have a case here. Archives and History Director Steve Murray said he drafted the statement of recommitment, quote unquote, that was approved by the agency's board of trustees. And here's some quotes from the article. The state of Alabama founded the department in 1901. Now, if you're in Alabama and you're a historian at all, you will know one of the most detrimental crafted documents in this particular state is the Constitution, the state constitution of 1901. And it has non-ambiguous terms and statutes that are set up to keep people of color in their place. And I use that in quotes. The state of Alabama, and I'm quoting from the article now, direct quote, founded the department in 1901 to address a lack of proper management of government records, but also to serve a white, I didn't write the article. I'm reading what was written in AL.com. But also to serve a white Southern concern for the preservation of Confederate history and the promotion of lost cause ideals. The statement says for well over a half a century, the agency committed extensive resources to the acquisition of Confederate records and artifacts while declining to acquire and preserve materials documenting the lives and contributions of African Americans in Alabama intentionally. Why was this done? Why is this all-out effort launched across this country to repress the mindsets of people of color, black and brown people, and to withhold, to suppress the actual heinous treatment of these people for over 300 years in this country, as well as their contributions? Archives and History, as I go on with the article, said it is committed to developing programs and exhibits to promote a deeper understanding of the roots and consequences of racism. See, they know, intelligent minds know, if you tell the story as the truth, it will impact people in a positive way. And so they took control of the truth to make sure this never happened and black and brown people would never celebrate who they are and the consequences. Malcolm X said a long time ago, the chickens have simply come home to roost. It has backfired on this country and on black and brown people as well. But we'll get into that as we close. They're committed to a deeper understanding of the roots and consequences of racism. An example was last year's exhibit, quote, "We the People, Alabama's Defining Documents," end quote, which displayed and explained the origins of 6 constitutions governing Alabama since statehood began in 1819. The current constitution, ratified in 1901 and heavily amended, was intended to preserve, listen to this, the constitution that governs the state of Alabama. Their own Department of History and Archives admits by this article that the current Constitution ratified in the state of Alabama, 1901, and heavily amended was, hear me, intended to preserve white supremacy and suppress the black vote. I'll let you hold on to that for a minute. Oh, it gets better. This isn't about tearing down, I'm going on with direct quotes from the article, our state or the people who built Alabama. Wake up, wake up. The people who built Alabama, those were not white Confederates. They're still making mistakes in recording and spewing forth the truth. The people who built Alabama were the slaves that worked the plantations, both by way of their hard physical work as well as the resources that were made by the white plantation owners and those elites who, yeah, they built a place, but they built it at the expense and on the backs of the slaves who were working for no pay. That isn't hard to understand, is it? You know, basic economics is supply equals demand. But when you have demand that is 100 times greater than your supply of the labor that is necessary to make the demand, you are over into profit by the hundreds of thousands. Notice this. This isn't about tearing down our state or the people that built Alabama. Murray said, it's about understanding them as flawed human beings. Now, this is whitewashing again, flawed human beings who, just like us, fall short of our aspirations quite frequently. That's putting it mildly, friend, Mr. Murray. But the reality is some bad decisions were made along the way. Bad? That's an understatement of the millennium. Some bad decisions were made along the way. Slavery, bad decision. Along the way, and we collectively are continuing to pay a price for that. Yes, we are. That is not a situation where only African Americans in the past paid a price for that. We paid the most lofty price, though. It continues to affect our people today. It continues to affect all of us because it rolls into issues related to access to education, to pockets of economic prosperity, as opposed to persistent areas of widespread poverty. The Alabama Department of Archives and History was the nation's first publicly funded independent state archives agency, according to its website. Now, think about that. Our tax dollars have been going to fund a department of the state of Alabama, and Alabama is no exception, but it's just the oldest agency of state archives in the country, as they report. But ever since Black and brown people have been paying taxes, their taxes have gone to support an agency that intentionally undermined the contributions of people of color, knowing that if we knew who we were and what we have contributed to a society, it would make us a more well-rounded people in every facet of life. Notice this. Murray said the first two directors of the agency were there for more than 50 years, and that's the problem. You have old mindsets, and that's the reason our show exists, is to deal with mindsets. So what's the big deal here? I'm closing. What's the big deal here? Many would ask because of their skewed experiences and privileged lives. What's the big deal? Why are we still dealing with history? Well, let's talk about these vestiges, the effects. Firstly, now think about this, and we're coming to the end of our show. Think about this. Why intentionally take away the idea of people of color being significant in all tiers of society? After being kidnapped, made to work to their deaths, pillaged, whipped, mutilated, hanged, sold as chattel, families inseparably severed, killed, then liberated with no resources. Why repress their impacts? Why not see that, okay, we did all these heinous things to these people. The least we can do is record history as it truly was. Well, here's what came to me. If they know these truths, historical truths, how powerful will they, Black and brown people, know they truly are? After we've done all of this severe list of treatments to them that should have taken them off the surface of the earth, and they still existed. And not only did they exist, they thrived and made innovations and creations that change. How strong will they understand? That is the single most reason that history was whitewashed and made to point to white people's supremacy and downplay Black people's and Black and brown people's effect in this country. Because if they would really think through the process and see how resilient, that's a good word, they really were as a people, they would know that by God, they're unstoppable. Second question that came to me: what will their oppressors look like in their own black and brown eyes and in the eyes of the formerly oppressed? In other words, if they really understood who they were, how would they view us who tried to oppress them and what is it? Genocide, create genocide. That's the wiping out of an entire ethnic group, a demographic. And we couldn't do it. And they yet rose, as Maya Angelou said, still I rise, like the phoenix, the ancient phoenix that rises forth from the ashes. What will they? I feel like I'm standing on my soapbox now. Number three, the third question that came to me in terms of why history was skewed and why the mindsets of people prevail with demented versions and editions of the truth of history, was that these people, the historians, knew the answer to these questions, what will their successor generations become to our successors? What will black and brown people who know and know the truth, when they begin to reproduce, how will their children treat our children, knowing the truth, knowing what kind of people God has gifted them to be? Nextly, these are just questions that made me question this article and its validity and why the mindsets have been the way they've been in our country. How will they, quote unquote, stay in their place? How will we keep them in their places of confinement, financially, educationally, socially, morally, and at all levels of entertainment, even athletically? How we keep them in their places? Because we couldn't repress them with the whip. We separated their families and they still rose. We liberated them with no resources and no literacy skills, and they still were a people of value, both to themselves and to our society. We won't be able to keep them in their quote unquote place or places. How much, another question that came to my mind, how much will this country owe them as far as historical mentions? If you told the truth about black history in America, you would have to credit and mention black people in a positive, non-skewed light every time you talked about America. Our white counterparts didn't want that because that would build self-esteem. And this demographic of black and brown people would literally be unstoppable by the aid and abetment of what God naturally placed in us as a people. The final question that came to me was the black and brown vote. You see, they intentionally skewed and sanitized history. Once they understood that the black slave was free, he could be free to vote, and voting would change all the pockets of control. So now, how will the black and brown vote become? How will it affect, quote unquote, our future? With more intelligent persons in positions of prominence, exposing truth and truths to their young. And that's why it was set to be the opposite way rather than the way of truth, because the keepers of the truth knew if the truth ever gets out, these people will be unstoppable. And then watch, the church would have a better job of persuading people to come to Jesus, because they would then understand that Jesus was never unfair. It was heinous people. So then this has affected even the church being polarized between black and white congregations. So much here. All of this, and I'm screaming this, all of this was intentional to protect, in my view, and preserve the concept that people of color were never to be considered equal with their white counterparts in America. This country wanted to sweep our impact away. We cannot be silent, because the lies and reprehensible misrepresentation of truth. These are my closing statements. The lies and reprehensible misrepresentation of truth has already destroyed our ancestors, the black slaves, and continues unmitigated damages to the perceptions of non-Africans in every tier of society. We're fighting racist wars now because of the keepers and tellers of history, let alone what these deliberate and subversive thefts of truth genocidally have robbed from our young. One of our followers to the show said this: silence is looking the other way. Teresa Thomas. I don't know if that's genuine to her, but it's apropos to our show title. Silence is looking the other way. We've been taught, and this is my closing, we've been taught that silence is golden. The first example of it in English is from the poet Thomas Carlyle, who translated the phrase from German in Sartor Resartus. That was the act or the play, 1831. I contend, this is me, George Matthews, I contend, however, that there is, as the ecclesiastical writer states, to everything there is a season. Just, however, as there is a time to keep quiet, the same ecclesiastical writer says there's a time to speak. The Message translation says it this way: there's a right time to shut up and a right time to speak up. With that, I close this week's show. It's my prayer, my desire that we will never be silent again. Remember, silence is violence. When there are issues that need to be addressed, we must be the people who seek truth and deal with truth from a godly perspective and let the truth stand on its own. Until next week at the 6:30 Central Time, I'll expect and hope to see you again. Don't forget to share the link and help our page to grow. I appreciate your time, value you as a human being. Blessings and favor be upon you all. Until next week. Thank you.